The late afternoon sun beat down on the quiet stretch of highway just outside the small town of Maplewood. The air shimmered over the asphalt, and the only sound was the rhythmic squeak of a loosened belt under the hood of a beaten-up sedan. Mason Harlow, a single father in his mid-30s, crouched beside his old pickup truck, wiping sweat and grease from his hands as he watched traffic drift by. He was exhausted. His shirt clung to him from the heat, his mind heavy from worry. Bills piled on his kitchen counter like unwanted reminders of how far behind he was falling. His daughter, Ellie, only 8, had asked him that morning if she'd still be able to go on the school field trip next week. He'd smiled and said yes, but the truth was he wasn't sure he could afford the permission fee, let alone lunch money. Just as Mason was about to pack up his tools, a silver SUV rolled to a stop a few yards ahead. Its hood steamed faintly. A woman in her early 30s stepped out, clearly flustered, dressed in an ivory blouse and navy skirt, her heels sinking slightly into the soft roadside dust. She opened the hood, staring at the engine as if hoping it might fix itself. Mason hesitated for a moment, then sighed and walked over. He'd been raised to help, even when the world hadn't helped him much lately. "Looks like you've got a coolant leak," he said after a quick glance. The woman looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. "I'm sorry, I have no idea what that means," she said, brushing hair from her face. Mason gave her a kind smile. "Means you're lucky it didn't overheat. Give me 10 minutes." He fetched his old toolbox from the truck bed. While he worked, she stood nearby, watching quietly. The engine hissed and sputtered as he patched a worn hose with a piece of rubber and a clamp from his kit. When he was done, he poured in some spare coolant from his own truck. "That should get you home," he said. She tried to offer him money, but he shook his head. "No need, ma'am, just glad to help." The woman looked at him strangely, as if people didn't often say no to her money. "At least let me get your name," she insisted. He smiled again, wiping his hands on a rag. Mason Harlow." She extended her hand. "I'm Clara Devlin." "Thank you, Mason." Then she drove away, her taillights fading into the gold of the evening. Mason didn't think much more of it. He'd done what anyone decent should. But as he drove back toward town, the sunset painting the sky behind him, he couldn't help but wish decency could pay the bills. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of good deeds, pause right now and hit that like button, subscribe to Touch of Kindness, and share this video with someone who still believes in doing good without expecting anything in return. The next morning, Mason was back at his usual routine, packing Ellie's lunch, dropping her off at school, then heading to the small auto shop where he worked part-time. The pay barely covered the rent for their small apartment above a laundromat, but it was honest work. The shop smelled of oil and old rubber, the kind of place where time moved slower and hands always hurt. His boss, Mr. Dalton, wasn't cruel but didn't have much patience for personal struggles. "Clock in, Harlow. The Henderson job's waiting," he grunted as Mason walked in. Hours passed in a blur of metal and machinery. Around noon, Mason was wiping his hands when a sleek black car pulled up outside the shop. Out stepped Clara Devlin, the same woman from the roadside, but this time dressed in a tailored blazer, her presence commanding attention. Mason blinked, confused. She smiled warmly as she approached. "I was hoping I'd find you here," she said. Mr. Dalton looked up from his clipboard, clearly impressed. "You know this guy?" "Yes," she said simply. "He helped me yesterday when my car broke down." She turned back to Mason. "I didn't get to thank you properly." He looked embarrassed. "You already did, ma'am." "Glad. Your car made it home." Clara glanced around the shop, the cracked tiles, the flickering lights, the old fan rattling in the corner. "Do you like working here, Mason?" she asked. He hesitated. "It pays the bills." Her eyes softened. "Would you ever consider doing more? I run a company, Devlin Motors. We design and restore custom vehicles. Yesterday I saw how you worked. Calm, precise, not cutting corners. I don't meet many people who fix things with that kind of heart." Mason blinked, taken aback. "You own Devlin Motors?" "Yes, and I'd like you to come work for us." For a moment, Mason didn't know what to say. His boss looked equally stunned. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I'm qualified for that," Mason said quickly. "I never finished technical school. Most of what I know is self-taught." "That's exactly why I want you," she said. "Talent doesn't always come from classrooms. Sometimes it's born from necessity and heart." Mason stood there speechless. He hadn't expected anything. He hadn't even asked for a thank you. Yet here she was, offering him something he didn't even dare dream of. By the end of that week, Mason found himself walking through the glass doors of Devlin Motors headquarters. The place looked nothing like the greasy shop he was used to: shining floors, modern equipment, and a team that greeted Clara with respect wherever she went. She introduced him to her head mechanic and told them to give him whatever he needs. At first, Mason felt out of place. He wore his old work boots and frayed jacket while everyone else seemed polished and confident. But once he picked up a wrench, all that disappeared. His hands moved with natural precision, his focus unwavering. The first car he worked on, a vintage Mustang, started on the first try after his tune-up. The team clapped, and Clara smiled like she'd known it all along. In the weeks that followed, Mason's life began to shift. His paychecks were larger than he'd ever imagined earning. He moved Ellie into a cozy little house with a backyard. A place where she could finally run and play. For the first time in years, Mason felt like the world wasn't just taking from him, it was giving something back. Clara often stopped by his work bay to check in. Sometimes they'd talk about cars, sometimes about life. She learned that Mason had lost his wife 3 years earlier in a car accident, a fact that explained the lingering sadness in his eyes. "I couldn't fix the one thing that mattered most," he said once, his voice low. She didn't respond right away, just placed a hand on his shoulder and said softly, "But you've kept everything else running. That's strength." As weeks turned into months, their friendship deepened. Ellie adored Clara, who'd often visit their house with small gifts or simply to read stories with her. Mason noticed the kindness in Clara wasn't for show. She was genuine, grounded despite her success. But one morning, Mason arrived at work to find the entire staff buzzing. A storm had hit the company's largest project, a line of restored classic cars for a national showcase, and the main display vehicle had been damaged during transport. Clara looked devastated. This showcase was her late father's dream, and it was scheduled for the next day. Without hesitation, Mason volunteered to stay overnight and repair the car. "It's not impossible," he said. "Just need someone willing to lose a little sleep." All through the night, under the bright workshop lights, Mason worked. His hands were steady even when his body screamed with fatigue. By dawn, the car gleamed again, flawless and roaring to life. When Clara arrived, her eyes filled with tears. "You did it," she whispered. Mason just smiled. "Your father would have hated to see it go unfinished." That evening, the showcase went perfectly. The restored car took center stage, and the crowd applauded as Clara gave her speech. When she mentioned Mason's name, the entire hall turned toward him, and for the first time in his life, Mason felt seen, not as a struggling single dad, but as someone who mattered. A few weeks later, Clara asked to meet him by the lake outside town. The afternoon sun danced on the water as she arrived, holding a folder. "I've been thinking," she said. "You've given more to this company than I ever expected. I want to make it official. You're our new head of restoration." Mason stared at her, speechless again. "Clara, she smiled softly. "You fixed my car when you had nothing to gain. You fixed my father's dream when you could have gone home. You deserve this." For a moment he couldn't speak. His throat tightened, eyes stinging with tears he didn't expect.